we're trying out the same list that we tried on Wednesday's stream. It's a little bit different than the one we played last Sunday. The main changes were to the main deck, including a couple copies of Skullcrack over a couple copies of Lightning Helix. This does make us a little bit worse in the racing situations, but there aren't a ton of decks where you're actually racing too much in the modern format anymore, with especially 4-color control and Murktide kind of taking care of what remained of the tribal decks outside of maybe a Burn Mirror and some racing situations with Murktide, although oftentimes Murktide is just in a situation where they have a giant Murktide and 3 counter spells and you can't win the game anyway, once it gets to the point where Lightning Helix might be relevant in a racing situation. Beyond that, a lot of the things are the same. We're still running the 5 Canopy lands, 3 mountains, 2 Sacred Foundries, a bunch of fetch lands. Obviously the fetch lands are important for pairing with your Searing Blaze. Then sideboard, the one main change we made was we went away from the 3-3-3, all that build, to cutting a copy of Path to Exile and then cutting a Deflecting Palm for the 4th copy of Smash to Smithereens, 4th copy of Roiling Vortex. Obviously, Smash is relevant in matchups like Tron, Hammer Time, any of the various Urza Saga decks, the Asmo decks that have been popping up. And then Roiling Vortex, obviously relevant against decks like the various Cascade decks, also important against 4-color elementals, keeping them from pitching their elementals without taking a bunch of damage. And then, obviously, preventing whatever life gain your opponent might be running. It's not as cut and dry, as powerful a card as it used to be. Things like Prismatic and then the March of Omens, etc. has been printed into the format, Boseiju, etc. But, still a very relevant cheap spell to interact with your opponent trying to gain life, which is obviously one of the main ways to attack a bird deck. Here for match number 1. Hopefully we'll be on the play. Nope, we're on the draw. Seems perfectly reasonable. We have Lava Spike into Eidolon, or Lava Spike into Searing Blaze. Did Mulligan, which doesn't mean much on 6. They start going to 5 or 4, then maybe you consider your opponent might be on. Okay, looks like we're up against Prowess. So I'm just going to go ahead and Lava Spike on 1. This might be Hayashi Red, would be my guess. Which, historically, I tend to lose to his decks, just because. Late at the stage, sure. Oh, we're up against Izzet Prowess. Interesting. Haven't seen this deck in some time. Did our opponent draw a second land? They did not. However, they have a Swift Spear, which could be mildly problematic. Never mind. So I'm going to go ahead and bolt the Swift Spear here. With the Prowess decks, you generally want to keep their creatures off the board if at all possible. They could have a Bolt or a Burst Lightning to deal with this, but they don't, so. So while I'm not the hugest fan of Sanctifier in the Burn Mirror, I am quite happy to have it in this matchup. Deflecting Palm's a consideration, Pass a consideration. Boros Charm can likely go out, so our opponent showed us, if it weren't for the fact that they showed us Sprite Dragon off of that light up the stage, we wouldn't know they were on Prowess, or we wouldn't know they were on Izzet Prowess. So Izzet Prowess could probably include Ledger Shredder, that. They could jam Murktide, although obviously Murktide is generally better in the Tempo deck rather than the aggro deck, but it's still a card you consider a Stormwing entity. So Path I'm more likely to want access to. Boros Charm I tend to board out because against a lot of the non-creature decks, I just board out Boros Charm. Or against creature decks, I tend to board out Boros Charms because it doesn't interact with creatures at all. Obviously, it's our best raw damage count. Eidolon, I'm going to board out on the draw. On the play, I would more likely to keep more in because, obviously on turn 2 it's much better. Forces them to deal with it before they start casting a bunch of cantrips and stuff. And then, the other card you consider cutting would be copies of Lava Spike, but I do want to keep our mana curve a little bit low. White cards can be a little bit vulnerable if they were more on the If they didn't show us the Izzet variety, I'd be a little bit more worried about Blood Moon, you know, locking out our Sanctifiers and stuff. This hand is debatable. So normally I would never keep a 4-lander on the draw or anything, but the positives to this hand is we have easily 2 answers to their first 2 creatures and a Rift Bolt, and we have 2 Canopy lands. So while I wouldn't normally recommend keeping this hand, I think it's perfectly fine in the matchup. So keep. Then obviously if we rip a copy of Sanctifier, this hand gets really good against whatever our opponent's doing. So, and then immediately draw the next hand. You want to main phase a lot of your removal against this deck because they do sometimes play things like mutagenic growth and such. Spell Pierce could be a card here. Are we supposed to play around that though? Our opponent's certainly representing it, but I'm not going to play around it. If they have it, good for them. If they don't, then good job representing it. And they just don't, so. How many threats do you have, friend? Hardcast, lay up the stage. So I'm going to suspend the Rift Bolt and hold up our copy of Lightning Helix for their Sprite Dragon. And we're going to want a Helix in response to this. This way they can't chain a bunch of spells. That said, if they hit something like Dragon's Claw, I don't even know what cards these decks play in their sideboard anymore, as it's been so long since I've seen an Izzet Prowess deck. And we're just drawing a bunch of lands. But hopefully we bought ourselves some time. Another Sprite Dragon. I don't want to do that in response to that. So our opponent can play a Sprite Dragon here. This is the danger. They already play a land here? No, I don't think they did, but with 1 card in hand. Okay, they have mutagenic growth, which gets us here, unfortunately. Yep, we're basically dead here. This is one of the dangers of trying to play the removal game against them without pressure back, is they do see a lot of cards with light up the stage and usually expressive iteration. So we need like path into something. Oh, this spike. So our opponent minimally, even if they draw a blank this turn, which it doesn't look like they did. No, that's definitely not a blank. That would be one of the most dangerous cards in their deck. And sometimes they chain like a god. Not even going to put the idea of deflecting palm in my opponent's head. On the draw, we're inclined to bring these Eidolons back in. Skullcrack's only particularly relevant against copies of Dragon's Claw, which they may not even have in their deck. And then what card would I shave? Maybe one copy of Eidolon. This hand is good, but a bit risky because of the one-lander. But I think it's a high enough upside that we go ahead and keep it. Do they use... Obviously that's a loss of a lot of our resources, but our opponent did kind of dome themselves a little bit to do that. It kept a one-lander. Interesting. Okay, so they'll have a second land for next turn. They have nothing. Let's hold a bolt here. Okay, you have a Spell Piercer. Spell Piercer, Flusterstorm, both of which are possible, I suppose. No, neither which way you're dead here, so. Nice. Yeah, always nice to get off with a win there. Alright, this is another borderline hand. Once again, because of the one-lander. On the draw, with all the plays we have, I do think it's worth keeping, but once again, this is a hand that if we don't draw a second land could punish us very badly. Opponent leads on Breeding Pool. Okay, so we're up against Living End. Got it. Probably have to take Eidolon, right? Okay, we got the second land, so this team should be reasonable. Sanctifier is the one... This is the one graveyard matchup where Sanctifier is not particularly good. So... kind of in that weird situation where our graveyard hate is not good in this matchup. We'll be able to combo us next turn. So suspend Rift Bolt. And that said, will they have? Oh, okay. So if they missed their third land drop, so the game is likely over. Because we know they had a Shardless in hand, so if they hit their third land drop, we were just dead. Well, maybe not dead, but we were in a position where they could potentially get us, so... I guess they're going to use Curator of... or the big whale dude here, whatever the name of the card is. Oh, petty theft. Interesting. Alright, let's put you to the test. Do you have Force of Negation? Doesn't look like it. Grief is a tricky card. Roiling Vortex is pretty reasonable overall. Smash doesn't do anything in the matchup. Sanctifier only really exiles Grief and Street Wraith, which Street Wraith will likely not be in their deck. Deflecting Palm is awkward because we really want to be trying to kill them before they can go off. Searing Blaze is generally not the best card in this matchup, so just 4 Blaze in, 4 Vortex in, or 4 Blaze out, 4 Vortex in. Because once again, Sanctifier, good against Dredge, decent against Reanimator, terrible against Blue Living End. Would have been good if Jund Living End was still the primary method of attack. Obviously, Eidolon's pretty reasonable in the matchup. This hand, if we don't get our Monster Swift Spear discarded on one, is pretty reasonable on the draw. 8 Line of Sanctity is a problem. Especially a late Line of Sanctity on a 7-card hand. Yeah, you gotta sacrifice your fetch land there first from the Cascade. This will force them to Cascade. Because if that resolves, then they just take too much damage, and then. Don't think there's a way out of this. If we were on the play, our hand might have been good enough. And they even have Foundation Breaker, so it doesn't matter. Alright, moving on. Gotta be mindful of Leyline. Is that a reason? I think that's a reason to bring in Deflecting Palm and possibly Sanctifier. Creature Beatdown's just not the best against them, though. Play. No, I cannot keep a no-lander. This hand's at least acceptable. Putting back. And they will obviously have Leyline in their opening hand. Surprised they didn't cycle in response there first. But got a foundation breaker, it'd be unfortunate. Force of negation, their top card. Probably not interested in drawing that anymore. They took out Eidolon instead. Interesting. Dual striking this. It's into 5, and now they can no longer cast a Living End without another foundation breaker. There's a grief, they go to 1. And they choose to die. Alright. Alright, we're here for match number 3. This is another one of those high risk, high reward hands. Is the risk big enough? Rolling is just a hair worse than I thought it'd be. All enchantments for the helmet 1 week. Rolling is just a hair worse than I thought it would be. Interesting. What other enchantments did you run in that, War Dog? How are you doing, by the way? We'll risk it on the draw with this hand. And our opponent, are we? Of course we're going to get a mirror match. Nope, not a mirror match. So, okay. Crashing Footfalls. So we are up against Rhinos. Okay, our friend is dead. Let's go ahead and just start burning face. Since they don't play a ton of counter spells other than Force of Negation and it's a painful mana base. Give them an opportunity to cast anything here, although they could have Violent Outburst on end step, I suppose. So we might want to hold up Bolt here. Does the Fiery Islet really matter in the face of what they have going on? Prismari command. Let them loot first, then we'll just bolt their face. This is one of the non-turn 3 Rhinos draws, so that generally means they're in worse shape. If they're smart, they don't tap that. Okay, Violent Outburst. Might have been better to do that during my turn, but, you know, whatever. Gonti's Machinations, Vortex Seal, a few others, but I can't remember the rest. The only problem with that kind of stuff right now is just the fact that enchantments are so much worse than they were, you know, a couple months ago. Feels like their last 2 cards are blue card plus force. Apparently the answer is no. Guess we'll find out here. Nope. It's always nice to steal game 1 against Rhinos. 4 Vortex seems pretty decent. Sanctifier is like medium against some of their threats. Doesn't line up against Rhinos, obviously. Deflecting Palm could net us like 4 damage. But is that better than some of our other cards? Searing Blaze isn't the best. Eidolon is reasonable against them most of the time. So I think I just go these out, Vortex in. Kind of very similar to Living End. Do you run, did you run the new Saga? The something beats the one where it does 1 damage on 1. The next creature you cast gets a +1/+1 counter, and that turns into a 2/2 haster. It sees a lot of play in Pioneer and Standard. That's why I was asking. Sand isn't the most exciting against them, as they often can deal with an Eidolon, but yeah, really, Vortex is a card that ebbs and flows in its power in the format. I'm just going to kill this with a Fire Ice. Sure. It's going to fetch a basic mountain here. You know, Eidolon's just going to either deal 4 damage or just die immediately, so. Those are 3/3 Eidolons were great. Yeah, I can imagine. This is going to be rough to actually beat 10 power on turn 3. I mean, our opponent had a much better draw this game. You know, they had the turn 3 Rhinos. They didn't, you know, take any damage from their mana base. You know, basically all the boxes you want to tick, you ticked in this particular game, so. And that said, if they get sloppy here, we might be able to beat them. I think I just block the, because these trample anyway, so takes a creature off the board. They could just have another set of Rhinos, and I think in that case we're just basically dead. So Rift Bolt suspended, 3. If we top deck another 1 damage spell and they have absolutely nothing, we might be able to get there. But chances of our opponent having a Force of Negation or an interaction for a creature just seem too high. Does that get there if they have nothing? I don't think so. But let's force them to have something, I suppose. Most of their damage is 2, so this will force them to react. If they have like a Fire Ice or something. If they're smart, they'll just tap down our Swift Spear. But they might try to catch it with a red spell here. And if we do, we might be able to get them with a bolt over the top. So they cast Dead. Alright, bolt over the top might be good enough here. We're going to be just short, huh? Our opponent has Violent Outburst or a burn spell, we're dead, but we'll do what we can here. Yeah, if they're attacking with both, we're most likely dead. Yeah, they have Violent Outburst. This has always been a tricky matchup, especially when they have their good draws on turn 3. The fact that their land base literally dealt them no damage that game also, significantly helped. Did you show us Magus of the Moon? They did. Okay, good one to play around. Sand just does nothing. Sand's great. Keep it. Get rid of what? Rift Bolt. I guess it just seems like a really bad card to bring in. Like, Blood Moon I can completely understand, but Magus, we just have so many bold effects. Like, yeah, I suppose occasionally it'll nab a hands full of red spells, or white spells, but we're not bringing in Sanctifier in this matchup, so... Wonder why they showed us Misty when they had Scalding Tarn in hand. I don't know. Put it with a Brazen Borrower, which is obviously mildly annoying. Foundation Breaker? No, they don't run Foundation Breaker. Let's go combat, make them Petty Theft. Seiju. Spend the Rift Bolt, cast a Eidolon. They play an Otawaru. Okay, they're just going to take their 4 damage and like it, I guess. Alright, I'm just going to force you to have it. Do you have it? You do not? Alright. Nice 3-0 start. We are on the draw this game. Do you think we still keep this hand? Although it is a little bit vulnerable to creatures, especially like a turn 1 Ragavan or something. Have fun. Turn 1, nothing. I guess we forced them to have a... They could have easily have a burn spell here, but... Maybe I was just supposed to play Lava Spike there. Kind of hard to say. Does our opponent dash a monkey? Apparently not. Well, they might just be bobbling us to see what's on top of our library, to see if dashing monkey is worth it. So do I jam, or do I just hold up Searing Blaze? Because what is more likely? Counterspell into Ragavan, or... Yeah. I think we just jam. Don't have another removal spell. They do. Okay. Oh, so you're playing it Legacy. I guess I missed that in the missed that somewhere in the description. Do you not have like any type of like Tormod's Crypts or anything to play around that? All these really weird games of Burn versus Murktide where they get stuck on 2 lands and we can't keep a creature on the battlefield. Interesting. Not that this plays around a lot, but it does play around Unholy Heat at least. So, opponents use 1 bolt and 1 thingamabobber so far. 1 bolt, 1 Unholy Heat, so go ahead and keep one of those up. Could have easily fetched the 3rd mountain, but I did want to get my white source. Well, yeah, I guess I missed Sulfuric Vortex. With a quick Murktide. Do I play around Spell Pierce? Opponent with a Dress Down. Does my opponent have a Spell Pierce? Do I even play around it? I don't know that I do. Of course they do. Why wouldn't they? Gotcha. So you were playing Fairy Macabre. Okay. That was a mistake. I guess it doesn't really matter because Goblin Guy wouldn't have had haste anyway. So I mean, it didn't particularly matter. If our opponent has Bolt here, we're just dead. But this forces them to hold back if they don't. Or Archmage's Charm. So there's a lot of things they can have here that just allow them to attack with Murktide and then kill us. So, and we still need to rip off top of our deck. Four, five. They're just going to play another giant Murktide. Looks like they're tapping out for another Murktide. Is that lethal? I don't think so. However, Boros Charms are only out. I think we go ahead and attack here. Expressive Iteration doesn't make our... Yeah. Yep. Monkey is just... This matchup has felt so miserable of late. It used to be when the matchup first came out, and even when Burn didn't seem to be performing well, I always liked playing against Murktide, but it seems to be like the Achilles heel of since I've come back. Definitely want Sanctifiers. Definitely want Paths. Deflecting Palm could be okay. Skullcrack's not great. Boros Charms, kind of meh. I know people like having the 4 damage spells, but they are a creature tempo deck at the end of the day. Maybe shade one Eidolon on the draw. Or on the play, I mean. Yeah, this has been the one matchup I haven't been able to figure out since I came back to playing more regularly with Burn. Think of the 3 times we've played it, I've lost to it twice. And obviously we're down a game here. Trying to think if there was some other sequencing error. Maybe we weren't supposed to... Maybe we were supposed to hold that Skullcrack for another turn instead of, you know, just playing into our counterspell. That might have cost us the game there. Although that still would have put them at 1. So maybe not even that. This hand just doesn't do anything. This hand's very mediocre, especially if the Sanctifier gets tagged by something. But I still think we keep it put back. The Sacred Foundry. So this is really awkward on our mana. Want to hold the, maybe I'm supposed to actually put back Fiery Outlet because we want the fetch land for Sanctifier. So, or fetch land for Sanctifier and for Searing Blaze. If I want to minimize damage that I need to but I think we'll just go with that and pass. Turn 1 Island go. Another Searing Blaze, not the best, but also not the worst, I suppose. There's no card they can play here that gets around this. Engineered explosives. Play out the land may not be correct with like a Ragavan or something possibly coming down here. But if they're like trying to dash a Ragavan, I think we're happy. Okay. And then kill spell for that too. And the Unholy Heat, but there was no way to play around it with the hand we had. Of course they have the fucking monkey. I think fetch land would be the best draw on our deck here. Problem is, if we don't play Riftbolt or suspend Riftbolt here, our opponent's going to know they're walking into something. So I just might Spell Pierce or counterspell this. So even if we would have held up interaction, they would have been able to counter it. At least this didn't be clearing lands out for us, which is both positive and negative. No reason to play God here. Okay, expressive iteration. Which they shouldn't have played their Spire buff now before they played iteration. Small sequencing error, not that it really matters, but opponent seems to have counterspell. combat. Decent chance this runs into one of a billion different counter spells, but okay, they get to play Lava Spike, which is whatever. Alright, well, you have Counterspell. It's really hard to beat 3 copies of Counterspell in the top third of their deck. Do you have another bolt? I screwed up there, so we might just be dead. This fetch land is now effectively dead, because what I needed to do was fetch a basic mountain, then hit them with the now, if they hit any burn spell off of our deck, we're just dead. Oh, okay. Any burn spell but that one, apparently. Alright, Murktide, just to check all the boxes. The other screw up, I should have played Goblin Guide last turn. Do you have a counterspell? You do not. Do you somehow not have a burn spell in your hand? That would be obviously Unholy Heat, not. Or Archmage's Charm, that would also do it. Alright, losing streak continues to Izzet Murktide. Quite an annoying deck to play against anymore. So, didn't record the Elementals matchup. There really wasn't much to it. It was Elementals or 4-color control, we're not sure because we didn't see enough out of their deck. They didn't play Yurion. They were playing the 4-color mana base with Ren. They had an Endurance, they had a couple Prismatic Endings, and then they died. So I don't know that Burn's tier 1, but last 4 leagues we've gone 17-3, with all 3 of our losses being to Murktide. I really don't know how to fix that matchup. Like, as I've said repeatedly throughout this stream and some of the other streams, it's a matchup I used to find favorable from both sides, and then you know, it's just one of those situations where the deck has gotten too efficient, finds its answers too well, and is one of the few Izzet decks that I've ever seen just cream burn. You know, like Izzet control, the various different like Through the Breach decks, or Thing in the Ice decks or Arclight Phoenix decks over the years just have done a lot of churning. They have a lot of like the same cantrips and stuff that Murktide plays. But Murktide just has such efficient, Spell Pierce, Counterspell, Archmage's Charm, 2 mana 7/7s. Just keep dashing their Ragathans. One of the weaknesses that Burn has kind of taken on is a lot of Burn is now a sorcery speed deck. It can play some instant speed things, but if you look at a lot of its instant speed things, you have Lightning Bolt, you have Lightning Helix, you have Boros Charm, Searing Blaze to a point, but like Lava Spike is sorcery speed, Rift Bolt is sorcery speed, Skewer the Critics is sorcery speed. It's just the deck doesn't play as well at instant speed as it used to incorporate things like Skewer the Critics or Rift Bolt or, and obviously it being a prowess creature in the deck, you generally want to play your spells during your main phase or during combat on your turn, which opens up the possibility of a card like a Dashing Ragavan every turn backed up with some counter spells just winning the game. Like, I know people want to board out or go down on like Lightning Helixes, but I don't really think that's the problem. I think if you can't answer Ragavan, it doesn't matter if they hit a Lightning Helix or not. They're just going to win the game with that Ragavan. That's pretty much how we lost game 2. We could play different ways. Game number 1, I shouldn't have walked a Skullcrack into an open counterspell, when they were already a little bit tight on mana and they didn't have any threats on the board. So a little bit is like play errors on my part, but a lot of it is just the way their decks are set up and their pilots are getting so skilled that a deck like Burn that should have a good matchup against a spells-based deck is just getting, I don't want to say dominated, like the matchups are close, but like in general, it's losing. And I don't know if other Burn players' experiences match that, but in my experience of recent note, a couple months ago and now, it consistently is the deck that I'm losing to. I'm still beating 4-color control. I finally seem to have found a good rhythm to beating the Temur Rhinos deck, which were decks that I would struggle with previously. And then we're running into like a lot of oddball stuff. And Burn is typically very good against punishing oddball things. Tron, Izzet Prowess deck we ran into, Blue Living End, etc. Burn is very good at punishing those decks. What it's not very good at dealing with is decks that can efficiently, or can be as efficient as it, and still have a longer game, which Izzet Murktide is certainly one of those decks. So, overall, really hard to argue with a 17-3 run with the deck over 3 weeks. So it's not like this was all in like 2 days. This has been 2 Sundays ago, I got the 5-0. Last Sunday, we got the 4-1. This past Wednesday, we got a 4-1. Today, we got a 4-1. Burn seems like it's in a reasonable place if people were playing these like weird off-the-wall decks and the meta's opened up a little bit more. I don't know that Burn's in a good place if you're in like a winner's bracket where you're playing a bunch of Murktide decks. I just don't feel that good. But other matchups, the 4-color Omnath deck has felt reasonable when we've played against it, which isn't very often. Rhinos has felt decent. Living Ends felt good. Haven't run into much Hammer Time. Now, I don't know if it's just because people aren't playing the deck online or what. Amulet Titan's another rough matchup that I haven't seen, which is a deck that I feel like it should be reasonably positioned, although I'm sure it has a rough Murktide matchup, etc. So, gotta keep this ball rolling and hope to see you. Well, I should be doing it, so next Sunday. So, the one thing, Wardog, is Burn is no longer a deck that does well when it's expected. Burn is now a deck that's been kind of relegated to it's going to do well when people don't anticipate it and don't prepare for it. Much like Green Tron, much like Dredge, its power level is lower than a lot of the format now. Without, a Fire Blast or a Price of Progress being printed in the format, Burn is not on the same power level as MH2, the format. It's just not. That said, it can beat a lot of those MH2 decks. We've beaten the Asmo Food decks. We've beaten the 4-color Omnath piles. We've beaten Cascade decks. It struggles against Murktide. Maybe there's a way, maybe a little bit more better draws. You can win the matchup. It feels bad. in terms of, like, it's a close matchup, but it just feels like they have that edge now. But I'm not complaining about the 4-1 result. I'm just trying to figure out how to beat that one matchup without, like, giving up so many other things. And it's not like we don't have sideboard cards against. Sanctifier is a house against them if it resolves. Deflecting Palm's okay. It's not great against a deck with a ton of counter spells. And Path is what it is. It's a necessary evil against some decks like, against cards like Ledger Shredder, Murktide, Tarmogoyfs, which obviously there aren't a ton of in the format, Death Shadows, those kind of things. It's a necessary evil to kill certain creatures because Burn obviously limited with red-based removal. But beyond that, really can't complain about the performance overall, and we'll hope to see you again next Sunday. As always, thanks for hanging out. If you're new to the channel, please consider giving us a follow here, and we have the replays are on MTG Nexus VODs as opposed to MTG Nexus, the main channel, as that channel's obviously kind of changed up to different content now, but hope to see you for the next video, and hope to see you on the YouTube channel. This has been John for MTG Nexus. Hope you guys have a good evening.